Hello, I'm Professor Stephen Calebotta, and this is the PowerPoint presentation for Module 1. So let's talk about some general concepts about essay writing first, and then we'll talk about the reading and writing assignment for Module 1. So, uh, rhetorical concepts first. Let's skip to the next one, rhetorical modes. So, some of you might have heard of rhetorical modes before. Rhetorical modes are basically just patterns of writing. You see a list of the most popular types of rhetorical modes on the right side of the screen right here: narration, description, compare, and contrast. We're going to talk about them a little bit because I'd like you to at least know what they are, because you might run into them in future classes. But we're not going to spend a lot of time using these rhetorical modes to structure our writing assignments in here, because they are considered rather outdated. I like putting links in the PowerPoint presentations. You see that right here there's a link at the bottom of this page that I opened up a minute ago. It's a link that takes us to a website called writingcommons.org, which I'll be referring to throughout the semester. Writingcommons.org is a website that provides lots of information about essay writing and grammar, and it's free, which is nice. But this is the page at writingcommons.org that actually gives us some information about rhetorical modes. So I'm not going to read through all of this. I guess if you're interested, you can. But I will point out one piece of information right here in the middle of the page. Contemporary pedagogy no longer favors declarative knowledge in the rhetorical modes. Okay, maybe if you're a teacher, that might be a little bit more interesting for you than if you're a student. But the teaching and use of rhetorical modes is considered rather outdated. And the general idea that I think I'd like you to understand is that rhetorical modes are patterns of writing, and memorizing patterns can be a helpful tool. But if we rely on the memorization of patterns too much, then it inhibits our ability to be independent, critical thinking writers, and it will inhibit your ability to adapt to different situations in the future. So I feel like we needed to have a brief talk about rhetorical modes here in the beginning. I'm not going to have you write, okay, I want you to write a definition essay or compare and contrast essay, but maybe it's important to at least be aware of them, because you might run into them sometime in the future. And I do want to talk about like two of them right now, because they can be helpful. The next slide, let's talk about compare and contrast. Compare and contrast is one of the rhetorical modes, but I wanted to talk about it because it's also an intellectual process that we often do when we are talking about, for instance, writing assignments. It's basically just where you put two things that have equal weight side by side each other, and you compare them in order to try to get a larger understanding of something. So there are different formats you can use to do that if you're going to structure an argument. Again, I don't really like patterns, but compare and contrast, I mean, the patterns here can be helpful. They tend to divide them up into different structures. On the left we have chunking, and on the right we have sequencing. I guess I like to call the one on the left subject by subject, because, for instance, if you're comparing and contrasting two cars, like car A and car B, you talk about all the points of car A before you move on to all the points about car B. If you're going to do sequencing, I like referring to that as point by point. So you might refer to one point about both car A and B, and then move on to a different point and talk about in each section you're talking about the same point with car A and B before moving on to the next point. So I'm not giving this to you because I want you to write a compare and contrast essay with the first essay assignment. I just wanted you to be aware of compare and contrast, because we will probably be using it occasionally throughout the semester. It's an important intellectual process to be able to put two things side by side and talk about them in order to get a larger understanding of something. But we'll be coming back to that later. The other rhetorical mode, which you might say it's not really a rhetorical mode, but it's just something that it's not necessarily a rhetorical mode, in that a rhetorical mode is a pattern that you can use to structure an entire essay assignment. And description is just something you kind of do all the time. I mean, you might do it in one paragraph, you might do it in one sentence, whatever. So, but I wanted to mention description because it is important, especially I think with the Module 1 essay assignment. You're going to be analyzing your own personal experience or personal observations. And if you can use a lot of vivid detail in your descriptions, with the Module 1 essay, but also with writing in general, vivid descriptions will get your reader more emotionally involved in your writing. And the reason is because the more vivid the detail is, the more vivid the image is in the mind of the reader. You're painting an image for them. So, and the best way to create really good descriptions is by using words that tap into the 5 senses that I listed there on the right side of the screen. So, yeah, description and compare and contrast. We'll probably come back to those a number of times throughout the semester. But for now, let's go on and talk about some general concepts about essay writing. So we're going to talk about the typical college essay. The typical college essay has 3 pieces. The very first piece is an introductory paragraph, and I imagine this might be something a review. You know, a lot of you probably ran into this in high school. But let's just talk for a minute or two about the introductory paragraph. The introductory paragraph is often depicted visually as a triangle with one of the sides of the triangle facing up and one of the points of the triangle facing down. And the reason they often use that as a visual image to represent the introductory paragraph is because the broad side of the triangle metaphorically represents a broad general concept, and the point of the triangle is a metaphor representing a specific point. And so the triangle diagram is supposed to communicate movement from a broad general concept towards a specific point. So I think that is helpful to be thinking about when you write your introductory paragraphs. On the left, you see that I listed off 3 elements that I think ought to be in an introductory paragraph. You've probably heard of the hook before, where you try to get in 1 or 2 sentences in the very beginning. You got to get something to, they say, hook the reader in order to get them interested in what you're writing about, so that they feel like they want to continue reading. Then you want to move on to, in the next few sentences in your introductory paragraph, you want to give us a general idea of what the subject matter of the essay is going to be about. You want to give us a general idea of what the subject matter of the essay is going to be about. And then, of course, there's the thesis. A thesis statement ought to be 1 sentence. It ought to sum up your main argument for your essay, and I often say that it should pop, meaning it should pop out at the reader. The reader should be able to see your thesis easily, and they should not have to hunt around for it. If the reader is not sure where your thesis is, then it means your thesis is not strong enough. Okay? And so where should the thesis be? Some people will say the thesis ought to be in the middle of the paragraph. Some people will say the thesis ought to be at the end of the first paragraph. It's not really written in stone. I would say that maybe it might be easier to get your thesis statement to pop out to the reader if it's, for instance, the last sentence of the first paragraph. It doesn't necessarily have to be there. But the placement of the thesis at the end of the paragraph can make it feel like it's that sharp point at the bottom of the triangle. So you're starting off talking about the general idea at the beginning of the paragraph, and then you're building towards that specific point, that specific argument that you're going to be defending in the rest of the essay. Well, let's talk about the body of the essay. So again, I imagine this might be review for some of you, but I have some arrows here on the right side. First of all, you notice that the word claim and support pop up multiple times here. And what I wanted to communicate is that each section of the essay should have a claim and some support. Now, what is a claim? A claim is an opinion, an argument, like a thesis. A thesis is a claim or an opinion or an argument. They all mean the same thing. It's a statement that can divide people. In other words, people could disagree with it. You would say your thesis statement and somebody could disagree with you. Okay, so for instance, 2 + 2 is 4. could not be a thesis statement because that's not an opinion, that's simply a statement of fact. So an opinion will divide people. Some people will agree with it, some people won't. So the general structure of an essay is that you have your main argument, your main claim, which is your thesis statement at the beginning. And then each section of your essay has a minor claim that is supporting the thesis statement. And so that's why I have these arrows here. The arrows on the left, you notice that each section, each claim and support is pointing back towards the thesis. So every section of your essay should connect in some way to the thesis. If it doesn't, then you're straying off topic. The arrows on the right side here, each claim and support points to the section before it. So in other words, every section of your essay should have a claim and support in it. And each section of your essay should connect to two things. It should connect to the thesis, and it should connect to the thing that came before it. So if every section of your essay connects to those two things, then your essay will not stray off topic, it'll stay focused, and it will create a feeling for the reader that there is a flow of thought. I often say to my students that imagine if you took one of the Harry Potter books and you took all the chapters apart and rearranged them. The book wouldn't work anymore. The chapters have to come in a particular order. So one of the things you want to do in your planning process before you type your essay is you want to figure out what are the ideas I'm going to talk about in the body of the essay and what order should they come in. Every section has a claim and support. Every section connects to the thesis, and every section connects to the thing that came before it, so it feels like there's a logical flow of thought. So let's talk a bit about support. So in the previous slide, I said that each section has to have a claim, and each section has to have support, something that is a piece of evidence or an example that is backing up or illustrating what the claim is talking about. Now in this slide, I've added a third element. You see there's 3 bullet points on the right side of the screen here. We start off with a claim, then we have support, and then we have interpretation or commentary. Now, I'm not going to read through all of this. You can read through it on your own. But one thing I'm going to point out is that I often use this term right here in the lower left called a support sandwich. And what is a support sandwich? A support sandwich is a piece of support that is surrounded by your ideas. So how does this work? So I mentioned in the previous slide that you want to have a claim, and you want to have a piece of support in every section. So what is the claim that you're making in this section, and at least one, maybe more than one piece of support to back up your claim. Support can be lots of different things. We'll be talking about that throughout the semester. It might be a quote from an author. It might be a statistic. It might be a personal experience or personal observation, something you've seen or experienced. So you want to give the claim, and then you want to give us at least one piece of support to back up or illustrate your claim. And then after you give the support, you want to interpret or give commentary, meaning what does the support mean? What is the lesson that you want the reader to get from that piece of support? Maybe what is the author saying? Why is the quote significant? Why is it important? Or why does your personal experience back up or illustrate the claim that you're talking about? Okay, so the reason I call it a sandwich is because the support is in the middle, and then you have the claim and the interpretation and the commentary on either side of the support. So you have a fact, an observation, a quote, a statistic in the middle, and that piece of support is sandwiched in between your ideas on either side. So try to do that in every section of your essay. Claim, support, and interpretation. Not necessarily in every paragraph. You might take more than one paragraph to do this, but try to have those 3 elements in every section of your essay. And then let's go on to the next slide. So in this slide, I gave an example of a support sandwich. This is a paragraph where the student did all 3 pieces in one paragraph, and I tried to illustrate each piece of the sandwich. So again, I'm not going to read through this. You can read through it on your own. But in the beginning, here's the claim, right? And I tried to label it right there. Here's the support in the middle of the paragraph. This example is an example of a quote being used as a piece of support. And then in the last part of the paragraph, you see they say this quote illustrates how, and you can tell that here they're going to talk about the quote. What does the quote mean? What is the lesson? How and why does the quote back up or illustrate the claim they're talking about at the beginning of the paragraph? Okay, so the last piece of an essay is the conclusion. Remember, with the introductory paragraph, the triangle was in the other direction. We had one of the sides pointing up and then one of the points pointing down. Here we have one of the points at the top and one of the flat sides on the bottom. And the reason, again, is because the triangle diagram is trying to communicate movement. So in the introductory paragraph, we were moving from a broad general concept, and we were moving towards a specific point. With the conclusion, it's the opposite. We're starting off with a specific point, or maybe multiple specific points that you were referring to in your essay, and you're building towards a broad general concept that you're going to give us at the end of the essay. One of the big errors that I see lots of people make with conclusions is they often touch back on ideas that they talked about in the rest of the essay, and then they stop. If you think about it, that's basically just repeating ideas that they talked about in the rest of the essay, which means they're making us read the same thing twice for no real reason. Some people say, restate your thesis in the conclusion. Okay, however you want to do it, I would agree that it's important to touch back on some of the specific points you talked about in the rest of the essay. But something else you got to do is you have to give us something else that we haven't seen yet. Because if all you do is touch back on ideas that you talked about in the rest of the essay, without giving us something else, then you made the reader read the same thing twice without giving them something else there that we haven't seen yet. So sometimes in high school they use the term final thought, like you have to give the reader a final thought before you finish the essay. Okay, I like that term, but there has to be something else there, a final thought, a larger lesson, a warning, a prediction for the future, some larger idea that we haven't seen yet in the rest of the essay. So touch back on your ideas that you talked about in the essay, but then also give us something else that we haven't seen yet. Okay. So let's just talk about the reading concepts for Module 1 for Essay 1. Maybe I should have said reading and video concepts, because I want you to do two things. If you've already looked at the assignment, you have to read an article, and then you also have to watch a video. So let's just talk about a couple of the ideas for Module 1. A couple of the key terms in Module 1, these three vocabulary words: integration, segregation, and separatism. Again, you can read the definitions. I think that maybe in the United States, especially in American culture, many people are exposed to the words integration and segregation. I think we have a sort of instinctive understanding that integration means putting people together in the same environment, and segregation means separating people. Segregation in the United States, aside from the dictionary definition that means mandating separation between people, of course it's also the name used to refer to the actual system that the American government was maintaining for a period of time, state-mandated separation of people. There were other systems that were doing the same thing, other countries around the world. For instance, South Africa is a prime example. In South Africa, they called it apartheid. Here in North America, our system called it segregation. But I think maybe separatism is a term that maybe some people in the United States have heard, but we haven't had a lot of exposure to it, perhaps, as much as the other two words like integration and segregation. You see that the big difference there is this sentence that says a willful act of separation. So segregation and separatism have some things in common in that they both refer to the separation of people. The difference is that segregation is a mandated separation, whereas separatism is a willful act. It's a person or a group deciding of their own free will to separate themselves from a larger group. That also means that the term segregation carries with it connotations of hierarchy and dominance. So segregation is a system that is mandated by a dominant group in order to separate, but also to oppress another group that has less power. Whereas separatism is a decision on the part of a group to, of their own free will, separate themselves from another group. So keep those terms in mind as you go over the reading and the video. And one of the things that you want to be thinking about is the ethical or moral ramifications of these different words. So I think segregation is obviously negative. The big debate here is whether or not separatism is a negative thing. You'll see an example in the video of people who are members of the LGBT community who they want to have a place of their own for gay people. You know, it's a video about gay dance clubs. So, and the journalist in the video actually uses the term separatism. So, are things like that ever acceptable? Is it ever acceptable for a group of people to willfully, of their own free will, find another place for themselves? In my own personal experience, my family is Native American, and there are sometimes where people in the Native community feel a need to have a safe place for themselves because they've faced a lot of genocide in the past. They might want to have a safe place where they can practice their religion, maintain their language, maintain their cultural identity, and they feel a need to have a certain amount of separation from a larger dominant group that has been abusive to them in order to maintain a sense of identity. So when is that acceptable? What are the possible consequences? I think integration has a very positive connotation, which it should. But should integration be the ultimate goal all the time in all circumstances? Is separatism ever an acceptable thing for people to do? So keep those ideas in mind as you read and as you watch the video, and as we talk about some of the writing tips for Essay 1. So the essay prompt is, how integrated is your life? How integrated is your life? Choose some aspect of your life and try to observe how integrated or how not integrated it is, and what does that integration or lack of integration mean? What sorts of lessons do you see there? So I've given a couple of steps in these next couple of slides about some suggestions that I have for how you might begin generating ideas for the essay assignment. In the writing process in general, it's a good idea to develop the habit of working from ideas that are formless and gradually working towards something that has a lot more form. So what does that mean? Try to accept the fact that in the very beginning, you're not necessarily trying to create something that is a really polished piece of writing. In the beginning, you want to just throw ideas on paper. They often use the term brainstorming or free writing, but just try to fill up lots of scratch paper. Just keep your pen moving and just throw lots of ideas on the paper. Don't worry about whether or not you're going in the right direction. Don't worry about whether or not the things you're writing down are relevant. Just try to get lots of things on paper. Later on, you can choose what is a good idea or what's not a very relevant idea, and what's interesting or not interesting to write about. So step 1, first of all, I said figure out which aspect of your life you would like to focus on. And again, just start writing lots of things down on paper. How many ideas could you write about? Your workplace, your school, your group of friends, a club that you like to participate in, places you like to go to hang out with other people, or dance clubs, religious organizations you might be a member of, Or even I put there, it might be an event or a festival or a tradition that you participate in once a year. Something else to think about is not just an event or a place that might be integrated or not integrated, but also think about in what way is it integrated or not integrated. So the article that I want you to read that is about a senior prom is about racial segregation, whereas the video that I want you to write about, that I want you to watch, is about people in the LGBT community feeling a need to separate to some extent, have safe places for themselves. So, people in the article are dealing with racism. People in the video are dealing with homophobia. So, in what types of categories do you want to talk about? And try to focus on one. Are you going to talk about race? Are you going to talk about gender, maybe sexism? Are there some institutions where it's just men or just women? Is that okay? Is it not okay? Or sexual orientation, gender identity, religion. So try to pick a particular place or an event, and also try to focus on one category: race or gender or sexual orientation, etc. Okay. And again, throw lots of stuff on paper and don't censor yourself in the beginning. And you can figure out what's good or what's not good later on. So here's a couple more steps. And again, the gradual process here is that you're starting off with just lots of crazy random thoughts on paper, and you're gradually working towards something that has more and more form. So start off by just throwing lots of stuff on paper. And then you see steps 2 and 3 right here are about trying to figure out which aspect of your life you want to focus on, and then also start accumulating lots of observations. That will give you lots of material to write about in the body of the essay, but also you want to try to look at the observations on scratch paper to see a larger picture. When you look at all the observations together, do you see patterns? Do you see a larger message? Do you see a larger lesson? That will start pointing towards your thesis. Remember, you want your thesis to be an argument. It has to be an opinion. So you don't want to just tell us a story, okay? You're giving us something that should give us a lesson, an argument about something. And so you want to look at all the observations, and the observations will start to sort of, this is where you gotta try to piece everything together into a larger puzzle. What is the larger picture that you see when you put all those observations together on paper? And that should start pointing towards your main idea that you're going to want to argue, and that should start turning into a thesis. Step 2, 3, by the time you're getting to step 4 and 5, that's where you ought to have a clear idea what your main argument is going to be and what are the observations you're going to talk about in the body of the essay. In essay 1, I did not require you to use any quotes or from research or from any of the articles. All you have to do is you have to use your own personal observations or experiences. I use personal observations because it might be things that you didn't experience yourself, but you observed other people experiencing. So it can be your own personal experience or personal observations. But remember the support sandwich. So try to have a claim, support. In this example, it's going to be observations or personal experiences, and an interpretation. So you want to focus on trying to avoid just giving us a narrative. Don't just tell a story. Try to give us an opinion in the beginning, in the introduction, and then have a series of claims in the body of the essay that are backed up with your observations. You're using your observations to illustrate a point and to argue a point of view. Okay? That's about it. I look forward to seeing your essays, and I'm also going to be in office hours this week. If you have any questions, I'll be in the chat room. So good luck with the essay.